thank you all for sticking around. I am Jacqueline Coley, and it is my honor to moderate the conversation with some of the filmmakers behind the incredible show you just watched. So please allow me to welcome Jim Hecht, as well as Janine Sherman Barrois. No, closer. Get closer with that outfit. Get closer. First of all, that was an incredible first episode. Thank you all for sticking around for our conversation. Janine, I'm going to start with you. Listen, I'm not going to say how we got to the Black Revolutionary Argo, but here we are. And I really like that we're going to get to explore it across 8 episodes. But talk a little bit about your involvement with this show and why you think that this was another story about the Black Panthers that needed to be told.
I got involved about 6 years ago. I was sitting on the set of Claws, a show that I ran.
Little show.
And I got an article delivered by PA. It was the Playboy article that Josh Berman wrote about the Big Cigar. And they said, do you want to sit down with Jim and with Josh? And I did. I thought this is an incredible story. It's very hard right now to tell biopic stories. The Panthers have been trying to get a story told about them for over 50, 60 years. And there has not been this epic limited series done. And so I thought this is a way to kind of tell a story that is a caper and it's fun and it's entertaining, but it can also contextualize the Black Panther Party in a way so that young people, can actually learn, because they don't really know who they were, they don't really know what was at stake, and they don't really know what they were fighting for.
And that's what's so great about this peek behind the curtain. And this first episode, Jim, that you wrote, it really contextualizes Huey, the man, the revolutionary, but also what we'll eventually see, which is the impetus of the series, the fugitive. And you're having to do that introduction and do a lot in that opening episode. So I'll just talk about with you. How did you even approach that aspect? Because a book is not an article, kids. There's a lot of things you had to pull in there, and how you sort of framed this opening salvo, this pilot that brings us so well into this world.
Yeah, I think what attracted me to the story was that, Huey's not a simple figure. He's complex, he's nuanced, he's complicated. And what I loved about this story, aside from the entertainment aspect of it, was it's really a portrait of a revolutionary at a crossroads. Like we're used to seeing, great people be great. And to me, when I tell a story, I don't think that's necessarily useful, because to see perfect people be perfect is not helpful to those of us who are human. And this is an incredibly human person. So what I like about Big Cigar is that it's this is Huey at the crossroads. And part of that, in this episode, he's struggling with, do I let Hollywood in, and what could the implications of that be? And Teresa, knowing him, says, are you worried about it sidetracking the movement, or are you worried about it sidetracking you? And he says same thing, which will come back later. But the point being, the rest of the series, in the flashback of it, we're going to see what got him to Bert's doorstep. And he's really grappling with that. Was it a good idea to get with Bert and Hollywood? Was it, and he's going to have, in this episode, you see that he was in solitary for 34 months, which we now know is a form of torture, and probably left jail with a great deal of PTSD that he's then going to pour drugs and fame and Hollywood and all this other stuff on top of, which wasn't necessarily a winning formula, which is all the stuff that's going to land him there in episode 4 or 5. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was going to say the flashing back and forth in time was pivotal, because we had to make sure people got what was at stake. If you thought it was just a caper, you would go, what are they worried about? But you had to actually understand that this was life or death. And that, right now we have social media, we have Instagram, we have phones. The Panthers knew, and Huey knew, you can tell by the portraits that were done of him, all the photography, the power of the media. And so the collaboration of these two forces coming together was a way to get the message out, because you didn't have Instagram. You couldn't go, here's police brutality. You actually had to have people see it to understand it.
Yeah, and there's so many powerful images that I've seen further in the show than y'all be jealous. There's images that are a part of the movement that are so iconic, from like Huey in that, I don't know. I used to call them
chair.
We always call them like bamboo chairs, but I know that's not the way it is. But that's what Black folks I grew up with called them. Anyway, those sort of images. For you, Janine, how did you map out the show? Because for folks that don't know, as the showrunner, that is a huge part of your job, is sort of mapping out the season. What were some of the big rocks that you sort of leaned on to know, hey, this can go, this can stay? What were sort of the quintessential things of how you wanted to approach the Big Cigar telling of a Black Panther tale that you leaned on, so that way you didn't go off course trying to keep all of these other people on track?
I think the article had really big framework. It had the framework of Huey knocking on Bert's door. It had they're in hiding in LA. The feds are, all over LA. And then it also had, now let's get on a flight to Mexico, to Tijuana. And then it had them in hiding in the compound. And then the escape from the compound to Cuba and the boat ride to Cuba. So we kind of had this tempo from the article. What we realized we needed to do was, what were the scenes of the Panther story that you needed to understand about Huey Newton and his fight and the party and how the party broke up, who were the inner fights. So we wanted to give you a snapshot, not because we thought, oh, this is the quintessential biopic, just so that you were curious enough to read their books, to lean in and go forward. So I think Jim and I and the writers' room, we outlined what were those key points. Huey was not on the state capitol scene where they took over the state capitol, but the state capitol scene is one of the biggest pivotal moments for the Black Panther Party. When the Black Panthers went to the state capitol, when Reagan was there, that is what changed gun control laws. Like, that is the truth. But we didn't have time to explain to you that they didn't want Huey to go for a number of reasons. And so we put him there because we were telling him the story, but we wanted people to get certain key points.
Jim, I think any writer is in love with their words. As a writer, I know that. We like that's a bar. I know I wrote that. But what's great about this show is you have an incredible cast with folks like Andre and Moses, and just they're going to bring more life to the words that you've already sort of fallen in love with. I would love for you to talk about if there's an episode, a line, or a moment where you really sort of saw, like, that is not how I saw that this particular moment would play out when we were maybe in the writer's room writing it. But then when we got on stage, one of these actors took it in a place that made it even better than what you could have imagined.
Yeah, the one that leaps to mind to me, and it's out today, is in the top of episode 4, there's a scene that's based in reality where they get out of Battle of Algiers, seeing the movie, and Bobby, in the middle of Berkeley, leaps up on a table and starts reciting the poem, Burn, Baby, Burn. And his performance was just like, it really touched me. It's pretty, I don't want to give it away, but it's pretty special. And then if I could also start to just add to what Janine was saying, I think the other thing that was important for us to show was that, and we allude to it a little bit in episode 1, but Huey makes this pivot to, I'm going to do social programs. I'm going to feed and house and clothe and provide medicine. And so you see, if you Google Black Panthers, you're going to get all images of guys with guns. But what you don't see is them getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning to make breakfast for Oakland school children. And the important thing for us was not only that they made that pivot, but also that it was working, and that the powers that be, particularly J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI, saw that it was working and declared war on the Panthers, not because they were carrying guns, but because they were serving breakfast to school children. And they were like, this shit could work, and we better shut this down. And they declared Huey Newton, at the height of the Vietnam War, the #1 threat to domestic security in the country. And that's also, I think one of the things that we're exploring as we go back when you talk about tent poles in the story, that was a key decision.
Yeah, I was just going to add that Andre Holland is such a tour de force. So this just gives you a hint of the performance. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So whenever we would write something for him, it was magic watching it come alive. Because you're like, even when he has a little bit of words, he says so much. When he has a lot of words, it's unbelievable. And so I hope everybody sticks with it and watches full. You feel like it's going to be this buddy story between Huey and Bert, and it turns a lot into a love story between Huey and Gwen. And it surprises you of how that goes, and what do you do as a revolutionary who is risking never coming back to the United States.
Yeah, and that brings me to my next moment is what I did love about, there's a heartbeat in episode 1, but all throughout the series from as far as that I've seen, and I know it's going to conclude this way, that women are a huge part of this movement. And I know for a fact there's been adaptations where that has not maybe been as far in the forefront. But I would just say, yes, there's Bert, who's a huge proponent, but let's not forget who introduced them. Like Moses is there. Like for every movement, and I know that has to be by design, of progress, there is a woman that is right there that maybe hasn't been shown prior to this adaptation.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we had our way, we would have had 13 episodes and been able to unpack every single thing. You get 6 episodes and you have to economize it. And so we weren't able to show all of the power of the Black females in the movement, but we definitely showed Gwen, who she risked her life to risk never seeing her children again, to be with him, and all the way through Cuba. And then they came back and they eventually got divorced, and he married Frederica Newton, who now runs the foundation, and they had a beautiful life up until his death, and she's carried the torch on. And then we tried to use Teresa as an amalgamation of the other fierce women that are in the movement. But by no means is this all of it, because when he left, the women were the ones, Elaine Brown and all of them, that took over the party.
And again, it really does, you have to do it the Hollywood way, as they like to say, but there's a lot to it that you can feel in that in everything that you do.
That line about, let's see how much Hollywood will let us tell, like, we're kind of winking at you, going like, we're telling as much, the best way we possibly could, but we're winking because we're in on the limitations too.
And I love that too, because that's what I was gonna actually bring to you, Jim, next is, there's a lot of research that goes into a production like this. There's a lot of things you have to let go. I'd love for you to tell me, what was the biggest stranger than fiction moment that you found in the process of gearing up to tell this story, where you're like, I think people, and you say it sometimes in the story where you're like, I know y'all think we may be lying right here, but we're actually telling you the truth. Did you have one of those moments for you in your research getting ready for this?
The biggest one for me was how I met Bert. I don't know if you've heard this story, but I started on this, this was my thesis project at USC in the late 90s. And someone who knew Bert said, if he doesn't like what you wrote, it's not like he's the kind of guy who's going to sue you. He's probably going to take you out in the desert and have you shot. And so I put it aside for a little bit. And then I had a career in like talking animal movies. I did the Ice Age stuff. And when it got and then when Josh Behrman, the magazine article writer, he wrote an article that became Argo and won Best Picture. And when he sold that to Smokehouse, I was like, Josh, I have something I think is similar. And he read it and he agreed. So started working on the article, but we couldn't track down Bert. So Bert had made all these movies and the Monkees, and he owned all of that. He put up his house for that stuff. He paid for it, and he had probably the equivalent of $500 million today. And in 2011 or 12, when we were researching, disappeared. Nobody knew where he was. His house had burned down. Nobody. We were ready to give up. And back in those days, I used to be a night writer. I'd go to cafes at like 2 o'clock in the morning. And one night I went to Swinger's Diner in Hollywood.
It's a very, you know the movie. You got it.
Swingers. Yeah, it's like in the middle of Hollywood. It's a diner. And it was 3:00 in the morning when I showed up, and they were kicking out this like elderly, unhoused gentleman who dropped money on the floor. He had like a walker. And so I bent down to help him pick it up, and I saw the eyes, and I was just like, oh my God, you're Bert Schneider. And he was like, yes, tell them who I am. Tell them what I did with Chaplin. And I was like, he really does have an Oscar. He's telling the truth. And so we sat in a booth, we talked to the son, came up, and he was living in a 1-bedroom motel room in the motel next door to Swingers. And, 2 twin beds, brick of weed in the dresser, because I don't want to live hand to mouth. And when Josh would interview him, he'd sit there with the Coke baggie, 74 years old, 6'4", 140 pounds, and just... Wow. So that's where, after all that money... That's where you... Yeah, and it was insane. At one point, I bought him groceries, and he got sick. And he said, somebody's trying to kill me. And if it's you, I will take you out to the desert and have you shot. And I was like, oh my God, he really does say that.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I did not know that. That's great. That's a very Hollywood story, by the way, too. That is such a Hollywood story. Also, not just my questions here, by the way. There are a couple of microphones here to the right. If you guys have any questions, don't be shy. I don't want to be the only person. Please come up and say it. I also wanted to take a quick moment to talk a little bit about what you've already sort of had since you put it out here, because there are people that are involved in this. Whenever you're doing a biopic, I guess the first review is somebody who maybe was there in a moment. And I'm curious if either one of you have had any reviews from some of these folks yet, from either part of the party or part of Bert's life or anyone else, to sort of like, have they seen the show? What have they said? Anything?
Two things come to mind. A screening in LA, Bob Rafelson, who was partnered with Bert and Steve, his son came to and he's now, a grown up, and he showed us telegrams where he delivered money to the Panthers. As a kid, he would help deliver the money.
To Cuba. He would send it to Cuba.
And send it to Cuba. And so that was like a crazy thing. And the other thing is we were able to screen at Warner Brothers for Frederica. And that was a hard screening, but she watched all 6 episodes. But for her to see it and to be moved by it, a lot of people just, because it's hard to understand if you weren't there, people that are in their 70s and 80s in Hollywood are very, they know about what was happening. The young people making movies and television, were seeing Vietnam, they were seeing all of the atrocities post-segregation happening to Black people. A lot of people wanted to do something. They wanted to get involved. So there's so many people that are in their 70s and 80s that have incredible stories about the time period, because they watched the Sunday night news and they said, like, what films, what TV shows, what do we do to make change?
I love that. I'm going to come to our question over here, but I wanted to make sure I also asked this one. What was your favorite, actually, I'm not going to say your favorite. What is the moment you're most excited for audiences to get to see that maybe they haven't seen yet or has been on the first 4 episodes? It's on Apple TV. Y'all need to go watch it. What is the moment that you're like, yeah, you want to get an audience react?
For me, it's the stuff with Glenn. Glenn Sherman, who plays Huey's dad, like just incredible scenes. And we would, is Apple still here? We would occasionally get notes back, like, cut that scene down. It's 4-6 minutes. We were like, none of it gets cut. It is all fire.
Love everything Glenn Sherman does.
The 2 of them together, like, and that's 2 of my favorite actors doing just killing it. Just chalk outlines.
I love that.
There's a big shootout at a restaurant that's famous in LA. That is a pinnacle in the show and a turning point. So I can't wait for people to see that.
Oh, the shootout is good and Glenn is good. Yeah. You're watching like Hollywood level, like top Black actors we'll ever see on screen going to it.
I was going to also say, and the paranoia that happened from COINTELPRO. So there were these tactics from the FBI used to infiltrate and to break down the Panthers. They spied on them. They they got moles within the organization, all of these things. What you start to see with the Soul Breaker, Huey getting out of solitary, and with the pressure of the feds, you start to see him unravel. And it's in that unraveling that you see Andre Holland deliver some of the greatest performances.
Yeah. As I say, I'm glad that my pitch was your pitch, which is Black Revolutionary Argo. It really is that.
Yeah.
Right here. Yes, go ahead.
Hi. Now I'm nervous. All right. So
Don't
anytime we see like a story about a person of color in media, it's asked to be watered down for wider consumption. How did you keep the focus on Huey and, not intertwine Bert in to overtake the story? And was there any pressure from the studio?
Listen, it's a great question because Huey and Bert were friends. That is a fact. And we ask ourselves, can you actually tell these stories of Black people and white people, or people of color and white people, without generating the trope of a white savior and all of those issues? Like that is it. We had Don Cheadle directing the pilot and the first and second episode, and Andre Holland. We had different, educators and people that helped us. And that was our forefront of our minds, was that this had to be told through Huey's perspective, and that there at no time could Huey's life be equated to Bert's life. Bert came from privilege. His dad was a studio head. What he had at stake was not what the Black Panthers or Huey Newton had at stake. So Don Cheadle made sure that all the time it was on Huey Newton, and it was on his fight to get to exile and backfilling how he got there. But I understand where that came from. That rigor was something that we dealt with every single moment on screen. And our way to kind of minimize it, but not pretend they were not great. I mean, these guys were great, great friends. The Black Panther Party was so infiltrated that this was one of the only people he could go to get out of the country. He couldn't go to a Panther because he thought the feds would find out, because they had so many moles within the Panthers at that moment. So it was a delicate dance. It is a delicate dance. But as you continue to watch, you will see that the Black Panther Party is really lifted up, and what happened with Huey always rises above the Bert story.
If I could just add to that, because I do think it's a central question. Yeah. Huey is grappling with his decision to get involved with Hollywood throughout the story. Everybody around him, except for Teresa, is saying, bad idea. Don't get involved with these goofballs. And at one point, there's a line where somebody says Bert might be the personification of COINTELPRO, meaning the FBI has isolated Huey from all of his allies. He doesn't know who to trust. He could get killed at any moment. The only place that's really safe for him is those guys. So he was sort of forced into the arms of Hollywood in some ways. And we don't really take a stance about whether or not that was a great thing. Even in the context of our story, many, if not all, of Bert's plans go awry because of who Bert is. And, so I don't think it's, and I don't want to give away too much, but you get to where he's in his crisis, he's going, like, hearing the message of his dad, and some of these things were wrong turns, and can he get it back on track as he goes to Cuba? And what does that mean? And I think a lot of that has to do with getting back to basics, who we can really trust, especially Gwen. And I don't think it's as easy as it might appear from episode 1, where it's you're going, oh, it's Argo, but in Argo you have a very competent Ben Affleck character. This is not necessarily that.
There's a moment in the piece where, it happens in the next episode, actually, where they make a decision to write a movie about the movie that they're doing.
That happened, by the way.
And that really happened. So Bert had the wherewithal to understand Hollywood enough to know that this movie that we're doing to get him out of the country that might have me in it might be the one that eventually gets done. So they make fun of it at the Ambassador Hotel. They make jokes about it. But he had the wherewithal to know that. But he also knew that he was not the star. He knew that Huey was the revolutionary and he needed to lay back, and Huey needed to do the work and get the movement done.
That was a great question. Thank you. See, y'all helped me out. I'm going to ask this one last question because for folks that don't know, y'all have now seen episode 1, and some of you may have already seen it, but episode 5 premieres on June 7th. So you've got this amount of time between now and then to catch those 3 episodes, and you're all caught up. Yeah. Well, they've seen 1, so they just got to do the other 3.
It's less than Oppenheimer.
Yes, it's less than that. But for the finale, for these last sort of 3 episodes, we've talked about some of the big things. I'd love for you to talk about something small that you're really proud of that you got to put into the production of this. I feel like both as writers and showrunners, you kind of get to add either a little bit of production design, like, no, this was the real painting that was here, or no, this was really something that somebody behind the scenes told us was essential for this, that you got to add into the fabric of this tapestry that you wove, that these eagle-eyed folks can spy in those final episodes.
I was just going to say that, like I said, it turns into this sort of love story with Huey and Gwen. And when you see them at the compound in Mexico, when you see the quiet moments and it's like raining outside and you see the tenderness, you see the fear, you see the feeling of like, what did I do all of this for? And will my people ever have equality in America? Like, you see all of those questions being asked, but you also see a man and a woman like in love and trying to pretend that the federale or the US government's not gonna, bust down the door at any time. So the quiet moments, like, we couldn't predict the rain and the water and the humidity, but you feel the love. Because oftentimes we don't show those scenes when we're dealing with revolutionaries.
I love that.
Yeah, a moment that's a little bit less emotional than that, but it's actually in the first episode that it kind of flies by and you might miss it. In the scene in the Columbia office with Bert's dad, as he's walking out, there's a poster on the back wall, and it's Ronald Reagan with 2 guns like this. And it was supposed to, originally in the script, it went from that poster, which is a real poster, to Reagan on the Capitol steps, because the thing he says in the show is an actual quote from Reagan that he did that day on the steps of the state capitol. And because to me, it's like one of the most wondrous things or crazy things or contradictory things about the show is like the modern gun control movement was started on the right by California Republicans, Ronald Reagan, and the NRA in concert because they saw black people carrying guns. And
That's
to me, that's just
what
like,
would change it all.
Yeah, and as the show says, the contradictions. All right, we're gonna end it there, I think, unless you guys have anything else you guys wanted to add.
Thank you guys for
Thanks,
watching.
Austin.
Keep watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tara. And everybody can watch the Big Cigar on Apple.